Welcome to the world of weather menders. I was inspired to write Weather Menders as a way of awakening people's hearts to the current reality of climate change and inspiring them to seek positive and possible solutions to the climate crisis, and also encouraging spiritual responses to this existential crisis. I wanted to do it in an interesting and entertaining manner, so that's why I chose to write fiction. Since fiction can often be prophecy, tapping into the possibilities of the collective consciousness and collective evolution and the embracing of the divine feminine, I chose to write a Cli-fi novel that is ultimately hopeful. That is, it's ecotopian rather than dystopian. What that means is it refers to a tradition that was started by this book, Ecotopia, by Ernest Callenbach, that came out in 1976. And it was an imagination of what would happen if Northern California, Oregon, and Washington all seceded and formed this country called Ecotopia on egalitarian principles and principles of respect for the environment, respect for Mother Earth. I had been inspired by that book years ago and hadn't realized that what I'm writing now in terms of Cli-fi, or climate change fiction, is also ecotopian, until a friend of mine on Vancouver Island, Guy Dauncey, who is another time travel author, pointed out that in his book, Journey to the Future, which is also, as I said, a time travel book, reimagining a better world, that it's also a different tradition. Most of what people write now in Cli-fi or climate change fiction seems to be very dark and dystopian, frightening, Blade Runner-ish. I don't want to imagine that kind of world because I know what the power of the imagination is. I know the power of visualization. I've been an energy healer and spiritual counselor for over 30 years. And I have participated in scientific studies about consciousness and about the power of distant healing and the power of remote viewing and the power of remote intention. And truly, there is no force more powerful in the world than the force of unconditional love. So what is Cli-fi, or climate change fiction? It's a term that was coined by a former teacher and journalist named Dan Bloom in 2007 after the IPCC report, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that was very much a dire warning for us. And so he started thinking, well, fiction and movies and imagination are going to have a response to this. And so he started thinking of Cli-fi, sort of like sci-fi. I didn't realize I was writing in this genre. I was thinking, oh, well, it's maybe magical realism or literary fiction or maybe sci-fi, soft sci-fi, because it's about time travel. And then I realized that it very, very much fits into this Cli-fi genre. So examples that I like of the Cli-fi genre would include Dina Metzger's A Reign of Nightbirds. It would include Barbara Kingsolver's Flight Behavior. A wonderful Alaskan writer named Nancy Lord has written a book about ocean acidification called pH. And there are more and more and more as we seek them out. I'm just not going to seek out the dystopian dark ones. I don't want to put that kind of energy out there. I want to believe that although the science is very clear that we are in a dire situation, and as we speak have about 12 years to even keep the warming below 1.5 degrees centigrade, I want to believe that by putting out positive thoughts, that positive solutions, spiritual, technical, scientific, are going to arise. The story came about from me thinking about how to actually reverse climate change. We talk about adaptation, we talk about mitigation, we certainly talk about reducing, actually eliminating fossil fuels entirely so that we have a fossil-free economy. But all of that is not going to be enough. I believe we have to have the imagination whether it ultimately seems possible or not, do you think about actually reversing climate change? So I started researching that before I started writing and conceiving of the book, and discovered that there was a 2014 white paper by the Drawdown Institute, which is an organic farming institute, that said that if we moved massively to permaculture, regenerative agriculture, organic farming, that by the year 2050, we could actually draw down enough carbon from the atmosphere to return the atmosphere to pre-industrial levels. Now, that would be incredibly significant. And it is possible. Right now, do we have the political will? Not right now at this moment. But things are changing. Things are changing. And Weather Menders wants to be part of this change by reaching people, by opening people's hearts, by opening people's minds. I hope that people will read the book and enjoy the story and love Georgie the time-traveling cat and all the characters, and then go home and start researching a little bit about not just climate change and understanding it, but solutions, climate hope. Weather Menders grew out of my own eco-anxiety, sometimes also called planetary anguish. This is when you identify so deeply with Mother Earth, with the environment, that you feel the changes that are going on. You feel the droughts and the floods, even if they don't affect you, even if they're distant. You feel the animals being confused and lost, the birds not sure when to migrate. You feel the thirst of the bobcats and the coyotes when there's a drought in your area. And you feel it going on all over the planet, whether you are even aware of it or not. And there's a new word called solastalgia that was coined by a man named Glenn Albrecht, who is an Australian philosopher, and he first came up with this term back in 2003. So solastalgia is a made-up word that basically talks about the nostalgia, the longing that we feel for an environment that has changed around us, in some cases changed beyond recognition. So you think about the Australian farmers and the terrible heat wave that has been hitting Australia this year and the various bushfires that they've had over the past couple of years. And you think about people losing their ways of life. You think about indigenous people throughout the world having trouble finding water or not being able to fish or not being able to hunt because of climate change pressures and because of other pressures. The Gwich'in people, the people of the Arctic who are fighting the drilling in Anwar, Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and have been for decades. What is the point of drilling more and more of a resource that is like some sort of a drug addiction? We can't use it without destroying the planet. And in the process of drilling that, we would be destroying an ancient way of life. We would be destroying the calving grounds of the porcupine caribou herd, which is sacred as a birthplace to the Gwich'in people on both sides of this imagined border between Alaska and Canada. So I started thinking, what would reverse climate change in a fictional way? And I started thinking, time travel. What if we could go back? What if it had never had to happen at all in this current timeline we're on? What would have prevented it? When would we have to go back to? And so when I was at Stonehenge in 2013, I attended a ceremony at dawn on the Mayan Day Out of Time. That was a ceremony with beautiful prayers and chanting and some gongs and some crystal bowls. And this was for the earth. This was for bringing harmony to the earth. And I started experiencing Stonehenge as a possible time portal where we could go between times and between space, and we could jump timelines. So after that, characters began to come to me, and especially the character of Tara, the 96-year-old woman who has been an anthropologist most of her life. She's originally from Taos, New Mexico, grew up there in a mixed family of Taos Pueblo and Hispanic and what we call Anglo in New Mexico. And so she had a lot of different opportunities, traveled through the world, ended up in the backstory. As we look back, she ended up meeting her twin flame, her Scottish-Afghan doctor, and going through many things together, including 3 plagues. And finally being there at 96 in the shadow of the stones of Avebury and Stonehenge, when the time travelers come to her, her step-great-granddaughter Leona the shaman, and Leona's boyfriend Janus, and one little cat Georgie, who will become the first time-traveling cat. So Leona, who is a natural shaman at age 16, she channels during a ceremony to make the excessive rain stop. 3 will meet 3, and a portal will be. The portal will lead to wherever there's need to stop the greed, so all will be freed. So that is 7th of October, 2050. So I've been doing a lot of research into what would be likely to happen, and there are a lot of different scenarios, if we do nothing. Now, I am believing we're going to do something. There are a lot of positive developments with the Green New Deal, with the school strike for climate started by Greta Thunberg, and now many, many others. And so I did start thinking, though, wow, what would Stonehenge be like in 2050 if we hadn't done anything and we're in a depopulated world? And I thought, well, a lot of the predictions are that it's going to be very, very warm, that it's going to rain a lot. And so I was thinking, oh my gosh, palm trees over Stonehenge would be very dramatic. Rice paddies around Stonehenge. Well, the really creepy thing is that February, just a few weeks ago, the winter temperatures in Britain reached 70 degrees in London and 65 degrees in Scotland. And that would be centigrade 21.2 degrees centigrade in Kew Gardens, the Botanical Gardens of London, and 18.3 centigrade in parts of Scotland. So Britain has already started having what they call tropical nights, which are summer nights where it never goes below 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So with all of this, I'm thinking, oh no, on this timeline, I'm not too far off. So we've got to change the timeline. This is chapter 1 of Weather Menders, 22nd September 2050, Avebury Encampment, New Avalon. As always, when she first awakened, Tara wondered why she was still alive, and at age 96, even healthy and fit. Gran! Gran! That would be her step-great-granddaughter Leona. Tara stretched, pulled her long white hair away from her sweaty neck, and attempted to curl back up into the relatively cool shade of the great standing stone against which she had fallen asleep. Gran! Leona's voice was more insistent, finally irresistible. Tara yawned a wide yawn at the same time as the sleek gray cat curled up at her feet yawned. She laughed and petted Georgie. Thank you. Did you sleep well? Soft words formed in her mind. She looked at the cat's intense green eyes and blanked out what she thought she had heard at her age. Leona ran towards her excitedly, splashing through a rice paddy, her wild, dark, kinky hair spread out around her like a raven's wings. She was out of breath by the time she reached Tara. Careful, admonished Tara. You'll get heat stroke running like that. I'm used to it. Remember, I was born a lot later than you, Gran. Right. So your body is adapted to the heat, etc. What's all this tamasha about? The girl's hazel eyes glittered in her dark-skinned face, reminding Tara of the cat. Long story. Tara smiled. I've got time. Leona settled down beside the old woman, seeking out the shade of the ancient dark stone. Where are you coming from? Tara asked. The old henge. In one day? Tara marveled at the girl's energy. It was nearly 40 miles away. Most of it was on the canals. I didn't run all the way. That's right. Tara still forgot about how many new canals had been dug as the waters had risen, extending the 18th century network as much of the West Country progressively turned into marshland, making foot roads impassable. Gran, there's people coming through the old henge, spacemen and women. Tara sat up abruptly. Leona, have you been... No, Gran, no drugs, no moonshine, at least not recently. You're sure you're not dreaming? Even as a child... Gran, Leona interrupted impatiently. You're not listening. Okay. I haven't been able to talk to them, but they see me, and I see them. And the others? None of the others can see them. Well, I think Janus does sometimes from the way he looks, but he hasn't said anything. I have seen them. Again, soft words in her head. She shook her head to clear it and looked at the cat. Georgie was staring at her intently. Cats do. She scratched the cat's ears, assuming that her hearing a cat speak was a sign of impending dementia. She was a little surprised and grateful that she had avoided it this long. Perhaps she was not too long for this world. Leona was almost grown. Have you seen them before? Tara asked the girl. Just like shapes, like mist, like ghosts? Always at the henge. Leona nodded her head. Always, up till now. What's... Tara stopped, squinting towards the whitish sun just dipping behind the horizon in the west. Georgie the cat froze, looking intently in the same direction. 3 silvery figures advanced toward them, through the rice paddies, just as the dinner gong sounded from the longhouse in the distance. Can you see them? Leona whispered. I see something, Tara said uncertainly. Just humans, but maybe they came all the way from the city. As the figures advanced, she had time to observe them. She had the keen sense that they were observing her as well. She glanced down at Georgie. He was tense, expectant, but did not put up his back or hiss. Clearly human, a little misty around the edges, but that could just be the late afternoon mists of what used to be autumn. 2 men and a woman, not quite spacesuits, more like the jumpsuits worn in Star Trek and other sci-fi films of her youth. Maybe that was the fashion in the city now. It was so rare that anyone came out into the depopulated countryside that she didn't know. The 3 stopped about 50 paces away. Their whitish garments glowed slightly in the gloaming. Leona crouched by Tara's side like the long-extinct lioness that was her namesake, her eyes focused, staring the figures down. They followed me here, whispered Leona. Tara could feel her great-granddaughter shaking next to her. She wasn't sure if she herself was shaking as well. Welcome, Tara called out uncertainly. Her voice was surprisingly strong. Thank you. A human voice, male, deep, not just a vibration or a thought in the mind. Do you come from the city? You are welcome to join us for dinner in the Longhouse. We don't have much variety. Tuna, rice, a little greens. The man shook his head quickly. No time now. You can see us, both of you? And the cat, purred the soft words in Tara's head. And the cat, said the man. The other man and the slim woman remained silent. Yes, said Tara. She started to reach out towards the man's hand to touch. The party of 3 backed off a few paces. No, he said sharply. Not yet. This is still an experiment. So far it's you, the girl, and the cat. Good. We have to go. Tara blinked. Leona and the cat stared at the place where the 3 had been. Lightning flashed purple-white, and Tara could see footprints in the mud, which were quickly obliterated in the deluge that followed. Georgie jumped onto Tara's shoulder and tucked himself beneath the oblong woven reed umbrella that she put over her head. Leona unfurled her own umbrella from her knapsack, and the 2 humans and 1 gray cat slithered and slipped their way to the Longhouse. As they entered the pool of fish oil light, Tara looked meaningfully at Leona. I know, said Leona impatiently. They think we were crazy. I haven't even said anything to Janus. Tara hesitated, the rain sluicing off her umbrella. How often have you seen them? This is the first time they've followed me, said Leona evasively. Tara stepped under the thatched porch and shook off her umbrella. She thought she'd seen everything in her 96 years. Wars, revolutions, terrorist attacks, the climate breakdown, the 3 great plagues. She'd seen crop circles in the old days when barley and wheat grew in these very fields. And she'd seen UFOs fairly routinely in her travels throughout the world as an anthropologist, working on environmental restoration with indigenous peoples from southern Africa to Tibet to Taos Pueblo, where her maternal grandmother's ancestors came from. But she'd never actually spoken with star beings or interdimensional beings. Her heart stirred with hope. Had they finally come to help at this late date? Were the prophecies that she had long ago dismissed as myths about to be fulfilled after all? Sammy. So this is my model for Georgie the time-traveling cat, but I didn't know him. When I first started writing the book, when I thought of it in 2013, I have another long-haired gray cat, and I have a Himalayan cat, and so parts of their personality went into this. But this cat, Samadhi Timewalker, appeared mysteriously on Christmas Eve of 2016 outside my house in a very rural area where we have coyotes and bobcats, and there'd been a snowstorm, and he was scared and lost. And his chip led to nothing and no one. No one ever answered the phone. No one ever answered the email. I really wondered if he was from 2050. And I tried everything to find his people, and he was a little argumentative when I first got him, so I was worried if he'd get along with the other 2, but within a few weeks, cat wars were over, and he's now best brother to the other 2. And when he appeared so mysteriously, I knew that I was supposed to finish writing Weather Menders and to go ahead and publish it through my company, Catalyst Artistic Productions. Now, I also knew I was meant to go to Findhorn, which is a very magical place in Scotland, where I'm going to be going to a climate change and consciousness conference in about a month's time. So thank you, Sammy, for standing in so well for Georgie. And he likes to pose for pictures and such, and I think he's ready to go. I'll have to give him a treat. So Georgie, the time-traveling cat, starts talking on page 1 and actually never stops. He plays a very important, heroic part in the story, and you'll have to read the book in order to find out what that is. One of the things that also distinguishes Weather Menders from a lot of other Cli-fi books is that it has a strong spiritual basis. It can be considered a Dharma novel because the characters of Tara and Xander, when we look back into her relationship in the present time, from the present time onwards, very much use their Tibetan Buddhist practice and their meditation skills in order to cope with increasingly challenging times as, again, we continue on the present timeline that we're on. And it helps Tara even much, much later in her life. Also her own practices, because remember, she is of mixed descent, and so she has a lot of Native American practices that she follows. And as an anthropologist, she had traveled throughout the world and had many different teachers from many different indigenous tribes and many different traditions. And again, it goes back to that idea of, are we creating something dystopian with our thoughts, or are we creating something ecotopian? Are we creating a vision of a better world, a world that can be? So I'm going to read something about the story. This will show both the spirituality and the love story between Tara and Xander. So this is set 3rd of January 2019, Drolma Ling Dharma Center in Crestone, Colorado. Tara held a pinch of tobacco up towards the golden sun that rose over the majestic white peak. Xander watched her offer to Mother Earth, Father Sky, and the 4 directions, taking shreds of tobacco out of the worn leather pouch she always wore around her neck, along with the brocade Buddhist amulet from Rinpoche. Her words seemed to form into frost and steam as they came from her lips. Just as she finished her prayers, the sun's rays spilled over the sacred mountain. Xander was respectful, and for this Tara was grateful. Rinpoche taught that all religions and spirit ways were to be respected as pathways to non-duality. But she knew that not all of his students understood and embraced that part of the teachings. When she was finished with her offerings, Xander rubbed her cold, bare hands between his to warm them. Her only ornament was the thin, engraved platinum band on her left ring finger. He looked at her questioningly. She understood immediately and tapped her medicine bag. "It's in here." "I was just wondering why you've stopped wearing it." "My hands are freezing here and it was loose. I don't want to lose it." He felt the leather pouch shiny with wear and was reassured by the shape of the ring. "Maybe we should put it in a bank vault," he suggested. "But then I could never wear it." "Are you a wee bit attached to it?" she asked teasingly. By his pained expression, she was suddenly aware that she had hit a tender spot. "Well, it's just that it was my mother's and my grandmother's before that. It's not the money, of course," he said hurriedly. "Though it is worth rather a lot, and we are in difficult times." She took the ring out and slipped it back on her finger. The heavy diamonds caused it to slip to one side. "See what I mean?" "Yes, by all means. It's just, well, never mind. Suppose I am attached to you wearing it. It shows that you're part of the family." She tucked the ring securely back into her pouch and looked at his earnest eyes. "Xander, I have to be honest with you. I love it, of course, but I do feel so funny wearing it. It's so, I don't know. I hate to use the word ostentatious because you're not and your family's not, but especially in these times, I don't want to draw attention." He pursed his lips. "You've got me. I'm more than a wee bit attached to it. We have so little left of that side of the family, and things only keep getting worse in Afghanistan. But we can hardly leave it in a vault in this country if we might be going back to Scotland soon." "True, it's just not me to wear something so shiny, so valuable. I tend to rush around and I'm a bit clumsy. What if I lost it or a diamond fell out?" Just then she felt a presence behind her, and the two turned to see Rinpoche walking from his retreat hut, his open-toed sandals leaving prints in the fresh snow. He had a grin on his face as if he had heard and understood every word of their conversation. Rinpoche stilled his prayer wheel and impishly grabbed at her pouch, feeling what was inside. He made a dramatic face of exaggerated curiosity, then looked at both of them in turn and shrugged. Tara wasn't sure what he was getting at, so pulled the ring out to show him. She was sure he had seen it before, didn't understand what he was asking. Rinpoche made a face of wonder as the diamonds dazzled in the bright morning sun. He held out his hand, palm flat. Tara placed the ring in his palm. To her and Xander's shock, he suddenly threw the ring as far as he could in the direction of the sacred mountain. She watched as it arced like a shooting star and sank in a distant mound of snow. She felt Xander start towards the mound, then restrain himself. She felt her husband's growing anger and her own upset and shock. How could she be angry at her beloved Lama? But why would he do such a thing? She wasn't as non-attached to the ring as she thought. She watched her beloved Xander's set jaw as he struggled to contain his reaction and frame some kind of appropriate response. Xander looked around and cleared his throat. "I wonder where Joy is," he asked. "Rinpoche, Joy Kabayure." Rinpoche looked up at the tall man innocently and shrugged. "Coming later," he said in nonchalant English. Tara saw Xander's keen eyes make note of the exact mound where the ring had embedded itself, pretending he wasn't doing so. She could feel the struggle between attachment and the teachings of non-attachment he knew he should follow, and felt the echo of a similar struggle within herself. This was a harsh lesson, and she dared to name what she felt about the situation, and even her teacher, resentment. Rinpoche ingenuously opened his palm to reveal the ring and made a clown face of delighted surprise, his glittering black eyes wide and his lips a small O shape. He placed it on Tara's ring finger and patted her hand, then hugged Xander, drawing the tall man's forehead down to his level, placing his third eye upon Xander's. Tara watched a tear slip down Xander's face. Rinpoche placed a hand tenderly on Xander's cheek. He took Tara's hand and fingered the ring, then emphatically exhaled the syllable, "Pei!" that was meant to cut through attachment and break it. Tears streamed down Tara's face as her emotions tumbled about in her heart, ranging from shame to attachment to compassion to simple devotion. Xander clutched her hands, similar tears in his eyes. "Tara," he whispered, "may I give it to Rinpoche to settle to support the center? It's yours now. I won't do it without your permission." "Of course," she said gently, slipping the ring off her finger and putting it in her husband's palm. Xander cupped the ring in lotus hand palms and proffered it to Rinpoche as an offering. Rinpoche looked surprised. "For you," said Xander, "for Dromaling. You sell it. It will get a good price." Rinpoche smiled, looked at the ring closely as if inspecting it, then both brought Tara's and Xander's hands together around it, shaking his head. He spoke in Tibetan. "He says that you may need it someday now that you're not attached to it anymore," said Joy's voice from nearby. Joy and her daughter Dechen had just left the Lama house and were shivering a little in the cold air. "Tashi Delek Rinpoche," she greeted their teacher with a gentle bow. Then, "Good morning, Tara. You need me to translate?" "I think he just gave us quite the teaching," said Xander. "But yes, later for our interview, whenever it works for Rinpoche and for you." Rinpoche set his prayer wheel to spinning and headed up the path to the Tara Stupa, seemingly oblivious to the karmic shock he had caused. Another thing that is very important in weather mentors is the importance of dreams and visions. I often talk about changing the dream, and that's a hashtag I use. I don't think anyone else does yet, but maybe they'll start. Change the dream. Because according to so many different philosophies, really both quantum physics and many Eastern philosophies and the mystic aspect of virtually all religions, we are living in a dream of our own creation. It's not to say it's not real, but it is a dream. It has a plasticity to it. It can be changed through conscious, focused intention. That can be prayer, that can be group visualizations. There's a lot of studies that have been done. A famous one is the TM study, where what they found is that in an area, if people, more than 1% of people were meditating specifically in the TM method, that crime went down. And of course, who knows how many other people were meditating using other methods. And it's not a double-blind controlled study, but there was something that went on. And I've been involved in double-blind controlled studies of distant healing, sponsored by Cal Pacific Medical Center. And there was statistical significance in the wellness of the patients who had fewer hospital visits. There were fewer deaths in the group that was prayed for, and overall a subjective measure of better well-being. Well, you can make of this what you will, but certainly I believe that we can have an effect both on the present and on changing the future in a certain way. So I'm going to read you the part about Tara's meditation and dream. So this is just after meeting the time travelers for the first time and not being sure what was going to happen. Tara cleared her mind. She'd been meditating for over 50 years and had been taught well, and still she struggled from time to time. But tonight was not one of those times. Tonight she slipped into samadhi, into the gap between thoughts. The memories of Xander dissolved, the precarious possibilities of the mission of the time travelers dissolved, all dissolved into light, into compassion. When she finished her meditation and made a dedication wishing for the happiness of all sentient beings, she slipped easily into a dream that was more than a dream. Tara was back in Alaska, much younger, in a fish camp not far from Barrow. She was taking notes in the long, light summer night. The tent flap moved. "Hi, Amy," she started to greet her Inupiat shaman friend. But it wasn't Emmy. A white snout, black nose, bright black eyes poked into the tent. Her heart stopped. Polar bears were extremely dangerous, especially these days with the sea ice melting so quickly and so many of them starving because they couldn't hunt seals from the ice floes anymore. A voice in her head, "Help us." "I'm trying." She spoke silently, mind talk. Are many humans trying? Sadness. There would be tears in a human. "I don't know. The ones I know care. My children don't have enough to eat. We don't have so many children like humans have," on and on. "Can I give you something?" "It would not be enough, but I'll take it. I promise I won't eat you. You are not my natural prey, and I don't want to hurt you. Besides, you care." Tara reached over to the portable propane freezer full of fresh fish ready to be smoked. Emmy would not be happy after all her hard work, but she had promised the bear. She pulled out a package of fish and handed it to the bear, who took it hungrily in her mouth. "Remember to remove the plastic," Tara thought. "It might hurt you or your cubs." "Thank you," the bear whispered, then departed swiftly into the midnight sun. The scene shifted. She floated above the Arctic ice cap up in space. The ice cap was growing. The earth was turning. She could see its movement and watched with fascination. Purple, green, and gold flames danced in a circle above the pole like an enlightened master's crown chakra. Floating, flying gracefully closer, she saw the white bears all along the ice shelf, strong, healthy. She saw walrus, whales, snowy owls, Arctic foxes, wolves, and ptarmigan. Herds of caribou roamed the tundra a little bit south. The lights of the giant oil facilities at Prudhoe Bay were nowhere to be seen. The flames that usually lit the night sky had gone out. Yet human habitations, small and large, softly glowed. Tara heard music, singing, instruments. Was it angels, she wondered? Dakinis, dakas, deities? Human laughter, joy. She flew around the globe, saw and heard this soft gentleness, murmured prayers, quiet. The guns and bombs to which humans had become accustomed had gone silent. Rivers flowed, rain poured down gently, oceans moved ceaselessly, teeming with life. Birds flew in vast migrations, landing in lush wetlands. Small gardens had replaced the vast tracts of agribusiness. The earth seemed happy. Tara felt happy. She knew that Xander wasn't here, wasn't with her, wasn't in incarnation, and she felt his presence in the oneness. She gradually circled down to earth like a feather and rejoined her now sleeping body, curled up next to a gray cat, 3 time travelers, and a young couple in love. Where would you choose to go back to, and when would you choose to go back to? It might be something interesting for each of you to think about. If you could change things, if you could change the present situation we're in with loss of biodiversity and with global climate change, when do you think you would go back to? I did a lot of thinking about it, and I did a lot of research about it, and I'm not going to say too much about it at the moment. Again, you can read the book to find out. But one of the places we do go back to is we go back to, I say we because I feel like I'm with my characters, to London in 1978. And that actually was a time that I happened to be living in England myself as a young writer. And I feel that humor and comic relief are important in a novel or a movie, especially if you're dealing with very serious subjects like this. And so one of my fantasies was always to go busking in Covent Garden. And it obviously was one of Tara's as well. So I'm going to read a scene from when they're back in 1978 in Covent Garden. "Anyone want to go out busking?" asked Dermot wistfully. "Our days at being street musicians seem to be numbered." "I'm in," said Jonah. Harry sighed. Not as good as you, man. Never will be. Not as bad as some people either. Can I come? I sing pretty well, don't I? Asked Leona. I don't know all the new, well, old songs, but I'm learning pretty quickly. Tara knows them all. I do remember them, she said wistfully. I'm pretty good on percussion, said Janus. Can I take one of those doumbek drums? And I, on the other hand, have no musical talent whatsoever in this incarnation, said Yeshi, so I can act like the poor Tibetan refugee and pass the hat. We hardly need money, said Sitara primly. Should we be drawing attention to ourselves? It's just for a lark, said Leona. Just have some fun until we finish what we're doing here. Soon as Harry meets with his dad, convinces him to get the Prime Minister to call the elections early, we're out of here, right? Please, can we have some fun? I have to say that busking was always a secret fantasy of mine, said Tara with a wicked smile. But don't you have to have some kind of license? Oh, no one bothers with that, said Dermot breezily, loading his guitar into its case. The day is yet young. If we leave now, we can catch the evening rush hour. So that was how Tara, aged 96 and looking about 40, found herself living out her youthful fantasy of busking in Covent Garden. All went well at first. They quickly unloaded the van, and Harry even found a legal parking space only a couple of blocks away. They set up, Dermot and Harry on guitars with portable amps, Janus playing the doumbek, Jonah on sax. Sitara kept her distance at first, but once Tara and Leona started singing Dylan, Joan Baez, Judy Collins, and other classics, she joined in with gusto. Yeshi played his part, pulling a Tibetan hat off of his head, working the crowds of market-goers and commuters on their way home. Georgie stretched out in a guitar case looking sweet and got even more donations. And then the cops came. Tara had always thought of the London bobbies as rather benign, especially compared to American police with their boots and motorcycles and big guns. And these police were indeed unarmed, except for their little billy clubs. But there were a lot of them, and they descended en masse on the little group of illegal buskers. 3 police cars pinned them in, lights blazing, and a fracas ensued. Tara had no idea how Sitara had so quickly manipulated molecules to produce the needed IDs, from American passports with valid work visas for her, Jonah, and Leona, to refugee status for Yeshi and British IDs for Sitara and Janus. We're going to make an example of you, Tara heard one policeman say viciously as he grabbed Dermot by the hair, smashed his precious guitar. Not only drugs, but hard drugs you're carrying. I don't have any kind of drugs, shouted Dermot. You think I'm stupid to lose my place at Oxford? Oh, an Irishman going to Oxford, is it? I don't think so, because I'm arresting you. Harry started to protest and was arrested too. Harry and Dermot were led away in handcuffs, and when Janus started to protest, they took him too. The 3 of them looked helplessly back at the time traveler friends who couldn't seem to do a damn thing to help them. So our time traveler's mission is really in trouble at this point for a silly little thing like busking in Covent Garden. So do they get out of jail? Do they figure this out to go on with their mission? You have to read the book to find out. So fiction can, in many cases, be prophecy. And for me, that's one reason why I wanted to write something that, though it went through the dystopian timeline, had the concept of jumping timelines, had the concept of solutions. And one of the solutions that we face is to embrace the divine feminine. We've had 5,000 years of patriarchal domination, of the model being hierarchy and up, down, and dominator and dominated. And so that's resulted in not only sexism, but racism, income inequality, etc. More and more, we're seeing that healing the climate, dealing face-to-face with the climate change issue, is a very intersectional issue. Because we're seeking climate justice, we're seeking environmental justice, which means an end to environmental racism, which means an end to the North-South divide, which means an end to the dependence upon fossil fuels, which means we also have to deal with extreme wealth and income inequality that we're dealing with right now. We have to deal with compassion with refugees. At the moment, we already have climate change refugees trying to seek asylum in this country. They're also fleeing violence and domestic violence. But the breakdown of the coffee plantations in Central America due to rust attacking the coffee and due to extreme heat is part of what is impelling people northwards. The same with the Middle East. There has been drought for many years in countries like Iraq and Syria. The availability of fresh water is going to become very important in many countries throughout the world, in the Middle East, in India, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to see ourselves as one world. And when we embrace the divine feminine, I'm not talking about matriarchy, I am talking about embracing that divine oneness, that nurturing quality of Mother Earth. I'm talking about people who are in female bodies doing it, people who are in male bodies doing it, people who are non-binary doing it, trans people doing it. We all embrace the divine feminine within ourselves. And a gentler, more nurturing society is the result. That's when we move away from the use of pesticides, neonicotinoids, glyphosate, weed killers, and that kind of thing. We move to permaculture, organic agriculture, regeneration, regenerative agriculture, regenerative approaches to the economy, for example. We need to draw down carbon from the atmosphere. And this book goes into 100 ways of drawing down carbon. Interestingly, one of the ways is education of women and girls. That was one of the strongest factors they could find. Because if women and girls throughout the world are educated, they tend, and they have choices, they tend to have far fewer children. And so they're going to have better lives. We're going to have a better life as a planet. There is also a way of drawing down carbon by planting 1.2 trillion trees. This is a recent study that came out. They discovered that there are actually more trees still, even with all the deforestation in the Amazon and the boreal rainforest, there are still I think they said 3 trillion trees in the world. And if we were to plant wastelands and to replant urban areas, we're not even talking about taking agricultural area out of production, but we're talking about reforesting and investing some time, some money, some water, some love now in order to create vast carbon sinks. What the Green New Deal will do is, again, address it as an intersectional issue. It will train people for new jobs. No, nobody wants vast unemployment of people who are formerly in the oil and gas sector or in the coal mining sector. But imagine that instead of doing these jobs, which can be pretty dirty jobs, what if you're up on a rooftop installing solar? What if you're a solar technician? And that's what you get to do. And some of you may be suited to be outdoors doing it, and some of you may want to do the indoor parts of it, the engineering parts of it. But in this vast transformation, on a scale which perhaps the world has not seen before, we have the ability to transform our entire economy worldwide and to have greater oneness, greater equality, to fight against the ideas of any kinds of prejudices, and to truly become one with Gaia, with Mother Earth. At this point, many exciting movements are already emerging. I'm very excited about the school strike for climate. The young Swedish woman, 16-year-old Greta Thunberg, is certainly one of my heroes. And she overcame being autistic in order to speak out, speak truth to power, speak truth to the people at Davos, speak truth to the UN, speak truth every single day on the media. And it's up to all of us to be her, It's up to all of us to find in our hearts that ability to speak up about that which we care most about, to speak about our love for Gaia, for the whole ecosystem, for Mother Earth, for biodiversity. It's up to us to heal the climate. So in that way, I can say that Weather Menders is truly my prayer for the planet.